Okay, so in this video we're going to be talking about phase shifts. Um, Phase shifts are moving our graph left or right, so we're moving it horizontally. Okay, if you look at the graph in the picture there, we've got sine of x in red and sine of x plus pi over 2 in green, and that is a phase shift happening of about pi over 2 or 90. Okay, so let's look at what that means to us. All right, we've been using this formula, y equals a sine of bx minus c, or it doesn't have to be sine, right? It could be cosine, tangent, cosecant. Let's recap our periods. Remember, cosine, sine, and their reciprocals, so secant and cosecant, all have a period of 2 pi divided by b, and then we've got cotangent and tangent, which are pi divided by b. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Notice that it is indeed a negative c, right, minus c. Our phase shift formula is c over b, okay? And again, remember I told you to key in on that minus. So that means we're going to be taking the opposite sign of what we see. So if the graph that we were talking about before, we had a pi plus 2, which means our phase shift is really a negative pi 0.2, or we're moving to the left 90 degrees, or pi 0.2, pi over 2 radians. Okay, so let's see what the process is going to be. Okay, so now we have a little bit more pieces that we have to identify. We've already been identifying our A, our B, and our P are for period. Okay, now we need to identify our C and where our phase shift is occurring. And when we're doing the phase shift and where it's occurring, we're going to have a start, we're going to have a middle, and we're going to have an end. But you got to find the start first. So we get the start by doing our C over B. Then from the start, we're going to find our finish by adding our phase shift to our period. And then we're going to find the middle by adding those together and dividing by 2. And then we're going to take the middle and the start and divide by 2 to find that middle piece. And then we're going to take the middle and the end to find that other piece. And we'll look at that in the next example here. Okay, remember we're always graphing 5 points, including the asymptotes, always 5. Okay, so we're only graphing one period, so just keep that in mind. We got to find all of our pieces. So we've got A is 1, B is 2, C is positive pi over 2, okay, because there's a negative there. Our period is 2 pi divided by B, which gives us pi. Our start is going to be C divided by B. So our C value is pi over 2, and we're dividing it by 2, okay, or pi over 2 times 1/2, which gives us pi over 4. So we're going to take what we got in the start, and we're going to add it to our period, which is pi. Now notice that our period and our start do not have the same base, but we can easily make pi a base of 4, right? Because we need this over 1, and that's equal to 4 over, we multiplied by 4 to make 1 4, so we're going to multiply pi by 4. Okay, so now we have what pi looks like with a base of 4. So we're going to take pi over 4 and add it to 4 pi over 4 to get our end. And here we're going to get 5 pi over 4, which is our end. Okay, and to get the middle, we're going to have to divide. So we're going to have pi over 4 plus 5 pi over 4 all over 2. But we're going to add these together and then divide by 2 to make it a little bit simpler for ourselves. So we're going to get 6 pi over 4. Okay, and then we're going to divide that whole thing by 2. So when we're dividing this whole thing by 2, we're really just multiplying by 1/2. Okay, we're going to get 6 pi over 8, which we can simplify, right? They can both be divided by 2. So we're going to get 3 pi over 4 as our middle. Okay, so we've got our end, our start, and our middle. Okay. All right. So let's come down here. We had an amplitude of 1. So we got 1 and negative 1. We know we're ending out here at 5 pi over 4. And in the middle, we've got 3 pi over 4. And we're going to start at pi over 4. Okay. So we've got spaces in between. I didn't do a good job of making those even. That we got to find values for. Okay, this one was fairly simple. It starts at pi over 4, which is easy for us to add. So this would be pi over 4 to pi over 4, which simplifies to pi over 2. 3 pi over 4, 4 pi over 4, which is pi, and then 5 pi over 4. Okay, I'm going to change my color so we can see some contrast here. Now, this graph is no longer starting at our 0 point, but it's still acting like it is. So, our function was sine, and sine starts at 0. So instead of starting here at my axis, where I normally start, I'm starting at my starting point. Okay, so I'm starting at 0. And then sine goes up to positive 1, back down to 0, back down to negative 1, and back up to 0. And now we have our pretty sine function drawn in there. Okay? All right, let's try it again. So this time we're dealing with cosine. Cosine still has a period of 2 pi divided by b, and cosine starts at 1. These are things that I think of while I'm drawing these graphs. So a is 4, b is 2, c is plus pi in the equation, so we have a negative phase shift happening, so negative pi. Our period is going to be 2 pi divided by 2, or pi. And our start is going to be c divided by b. Okay, so we have negative pi divided by 2, so negative pi over 2. Our end, we're adding pi to pi over 2. Remember, we can again make this a base of 2. Multiply both by 2, we get 2 pi. So negative pi over 2 plus 2 pi over 2 gives us pi over 2. So that's our end. That's our start. Now this middle is probably pretty easy for us to see, but let's do the math. We got negative pi over 2 plus pi over 2 equals 0. You divide 0 by 2, you just get 0. So I'm going to actually extend my graph here. So I've got a little more space. Okay, so I know I'm ending at pi over 2 and I'm starting at negative pi over 2, which means I have to have two things in the middle before I get to 0. So I'm going to have negative pi over 2 out here and pi over 2 over here. 0 is my middle. So if I cut pi over 2 in half, or multiply by half, I just get pi over 4. Okay, so again, on this side, I'm doing the same thing. I get negative pi over 4. And then 0 is included in my graph this time. But I am starting at negative pi over 2 for my cosine graph. Oh, got to put my amplitude in here. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so at negative pi over 2, I'm starting my normal cosine. My normal cosine starts at 1, so we're going to start up here at 4. Okay, then it comes down to 0, and then it comes down to negative, and then back up to 0, and back up to our positive. It still has the same general shape. We just started it from a new location. Okay, let's do it again. We got an A of 2. Remember, A is never negative, but this tells us we flip. Okay, a B of 3, a C of pi over 3. Our period is 2 pi divided by our B, so 2 pi over 3. And our C over B for our start is going to be pi over 3 divided by 3, or multiplied by 1/3. Okay, so that gives us pi over 9. Okay, 2 pi over 3 is not in a base of 9, but we can make it a base of 9. Okay, so we multiplied by 3 to get to 9, so we're going to multiply the top by 3. So we get 6 pi over 9. So we're going to have pi over 9 plus 6 pi over 9, which gives us 7 pi over 9 for our end. Okay, to get the middle, we're going to add them together and divide by 2. So pi over 9 plus 7 pi over 9 gives us 8 pi over 9. And then we're dividing that whole thing by 2, or multiplying by 1/2. So that's going to give us 8 pi over 18, which we can simplify, because they can both be divided by 2, to 4 pi over 9. So we're going to come down to our graph here. Our amplitude was 2, so 1, 2. Okay, we're ending out here at 7 pi over 9. Our middle was 4 pi over 9. And our start was at pi over 9. Now, I know a lot of us think that pi over 9 would now be the interval. But because we have a phase shift, that is not what's occurring. So what we need to do is take the first and the middle and add them together and then divide by 2. So I'm going to extend this page so we can do some math. So we've got pi over 9 plus 4 pi over 9 gives us 5 pi over 9. Okay, and then we're going to have to divide that by 2, or multiply by 1/2. So we get 5 pi over 18. So this middle one is 5 pi over 18. Okay, we have to do the same thing to find this middle piece. So we're going to do 4 pi over 9 plus 7 pi over 9, which gives us 11 pi over 9. And we're going to divide it by 2, or multiply by 1/2. So we get 11 pi over 18. Okay, I know it's a lot of math, but as long as you're doing math properly, you're going to be okay. All right, so we started at pi over 9, and this is our sine function. So sine always starts at 0, and we have to remember that this was also flipped. We had a negative. So, but flipping at 0 doesn't change, it stays where it is. It normally goes up, but now we flipped it, so it's going down, and then it comes back up. Okay, and follows the flipped pattern there. Okay, you have one more example on your sheet. I want you to give that one a try. If you have questions about that one, feel free to ask.